the making of the record really was about the sequencing and like which songs, not just what order they're going to be in, but which songs are going to be on the record. When I was going to sell my records, because I thought I was going to pass away, I was going to have like a pop-up store or something, and it was going to be called Death Records, which is the name of the label. I started a fanzine like in 5th or 6th grade and sold them to my friends at school and things like that.
Hello, everyone. This is W, host of the High Art on the Edge page, host of this podcast feature known as Surprise Cast. In fact, we have a guest here in the studio, Mark Robinson of Unrest. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing, W?
2025, here we are.
Yeah.
You realize we're going to be celebrating something soon, don't you?
So,
yeah, you got an anniversary coming up here?
Oh,
a little album.
Talking about the Perfect Teeth album?
Yeah.
The 32nd anniversary?
I find that there is a plethora of television series for us to connect with. It could be something really dramatic. It could be war. It could be some documentary. There are also podcasts, the way we connect to other people. Could you tell the listeners anything you're listening or watching you'd like to recommend? Could be a book, could be a movie, it could be a podcast.
Right. I am reading a book called Briefly Perfectly Human, which is, I'm only a little bit through it, but it's pretty inspirational, and it talks about life and death and how you should take advantage of your time here on planet Earth.
What made you pick this one up?
I actually designed the cover, but I think it was released. It was published. When was it? Published like a year ago. And I finally started reading it. I mean, I did read part of it before, but now I'm like reading the whole thing. So.
And who's the author?
It's Alua Arthur.
Oh. And is it for kind of all demographics, all ages? Is it more geared towards adults?
I would think it's more of an adult book, yeah. I mean, I don't think a 5-year-old wants to think about their eventual death.
Yeah. And I'm fascinated, and I'm sure there are people listening to this who are avid readers. Give us a little bit more about this book. How are you connecting to it?
I think, well, she's a death doula. So I don't know if you know what a birth doula is, where they kind of will help and assist the mother before the birth and during the birth. So this is a death doula, which is something I didn't really know existed before I saw this book was written. But it kind of makes sense now that you, like, if you're, on your deathbed, or you say you're suffering from a bout of cancer or something like that, it kind of makes sense. Like, you have someone who can help you through that. And I think the gist of the book is kind of get all your ducks in a row before you maybe get your bucket list out and start checking things off.
Wow.
Before the time comes, which it comes for all of us.
It sounds pretty heavy-handed. Are there some lighter moments?
Definitely. Like, I just read the other day, I was reading the introduction. It was about the author's trip to Cuba. And she met this woman who she later found out was like dying of cancer and was like just traveling the world. And she kind of had this epiphany and had like a near-death experience. Well, there's a lot to talk about, but yeah, there's definitely lighter moments for sure. I think that's the other thing, is she's trying to convey that death is like such a natural thing, and it's not yet something to be, I don't know, super afraid of, I guess.
Yeah. For me, I because I was an elementary school teacher, being around children for so many years was a great mirror into the thought process of death, because children have this unique way of getting adults to really think about their behavior, kind of their own mortality. And so in a positive way, I was experiencing that notion of death and how important it was for me to really connect to each student as best as possible and kind of suck the marrow out of the teaching experience. So let me ask you this, besides this book, have there been other experiences that have helped shaped and formed your opinions regarding what could be construed as a very, very heavy subject matter? Before we launch into that heavy subject matter, I wanted to let you all know my first encounter with Mark. My friends and I were enjoying some good beers at the local pub in Kentish Town known as the Bull and Gate. I recognized Mark from afar as he had entered the pub. I walked over to him and introduced myself, and he said, "Do I know you?" And I said, "No, but I sure do like Team Beat Records, Unrest, and Air Miami." With that twinkle in his eyes and warm, friendly smile, he was very appreciative of that exchange of conversation. I realized something after having a great podcast interview with him. That kindness many years ago, charm, intelligence, and creativity, all there. So keep listening and admire a gentleman that certainly knows quite a bit about music, but really the importance of the human connection.
Well, I grew up in the Christian Science religion, and from what I can remember, I haven't really studied that in a very long time, but from what I remember, there is not really a birth or a death, and you're just like going on forever. And so I think there's no heaven. You're not going anywhere. You're just there.
Yeah.
Actually, this is kind of like the physical world is kind of more of an illusion or something like that. So I feel like that was, I don't know, that was kind of like a positive or reinforcing happy is like a positive thing that I think I carried over from childhood.
Yeah.
That it was like, oh, I don't have to worry about that. So I can just do my thing. I don't have to worry about death.
That must be very comforting.
Yeah, I would think so. If you can get into that mindset.
Sure. You mentioned childhood. Why don't you tell the listeners, if you don't mind, some warm feelings, memories, smells, sights? What takes you back to those precious moments?
Right. I mean, there's certain things like, I don't know, like a hot dog vendor on the street corner, and I smell that, and I'm all of a sudden back at like Little League baseball.
Yeah.
You know, or I smell something that has come into the house that smells like my grandparents' house. I don't know what it is, but it's like that very specific smell. Maybe it's me because I'm getting older.
Did you play baseball?
I did. Yeah, I played 2 years of Little League baseball.
Did you enjoy it?
For the most part, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I didn't. I should have kept going with it, but I think it was like 4th and 5th grade or something like that. And I remember seeing, I think we were called the B team. And then to get into the A league, it was like people are a little older, a little bigger, and better. And I just remember seeing one of the A games and the difference between their games and our games, besides the fact that they were faster and stronger, was that you could hear the ball going through the air. And that seemed kind of intimidating. But I'm sure it would have been fine had I continued with my baseball.
Tell us about your upbringing a little bit regarding your parents.
My parents, I guess I was born in Long Island, and both sets of grandparents lived in a town in New Jersey. And at some point, my 2 sets of grandparents lived like 2 blocks away from each other. So it was pretty great going to visit them.
Yeah.
And one set of grandparents moved next door to where they were living, built a swimming pool, and sold the original house to my mom and dad, essentially so they could have grandchildren next door.
Nice.
So that was pretty amazing. But then a couple years later, I think when I was 4 or 5, the parents get divorced, and then we're moving to the next town over, and then we're moving to Washington, D.C. So I still did get to use that pool though, because I would come back for the summers and things like that.
So I've spoken to many artists, musicians who have shared a little bit about how divorce impacted their childhood. Do you mind sharing?
I mean, the practical things that I can think of are, I lived just with my mom. There was, my dad was still in New Jersey. So there was a lot of, and it was also a long time ago before this helicopter parenting stuff was going on. And I think even if that was going on, my mom wouldn't have time to to do that as one person with two kids. But there was just a lot of freedom just going out and doing whatever the hell I wanted to all the time.
Did you enjoy that freedom, or do you wish things were a little bit more controlled?
I think both.
Okay.
Like the freedom is always great. But then there's things like, dropping out of school or dropping out of college or doing those kind of things where maybe having another parent to push me might have been better. But everything seems to have worked out okay.
So in terms of seeing your father, how often did you actually see him?
It was pretty often, like holidays and summers. Yeah. Like Christmas and for a few weeks in the summer. And the grandparents were still there where he was living. So
do you think any of this experience with divorce shows up in your music?
I have no idea. Probably.
Okay. Maybe subconsciously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like lyrically, or maybe even like how could it show up like musically somehow? I don't know.
Perhaps if in a rageful expression.
Right. Is that why I loved, hardcore punk music as a kid?
Perhaps. We're going to get into that one in a second. Who you most like, mom or dad, in terms of kind of traits?
I think a little bit of both of them, I suppose. I mean, sometimes you look in the mirror and you're like, oh my God, wow. Yeah. Like it's like your dad is in the mirror or something like that. But interestingly, I think my mom they were both like in choral groups or like singing groups.
Yeah.
But there was only, from what I recall, there was only like maybe 10 records in the house. So it was not like a big musical thing going on.
Do you remember any of the records?
There was Man of La Mancha. There was Hustle Hits, which is actually a really good record. I still have that one. From the 70s, it had the little footprints on the back where you could figure out how to do the dance. And then I think there was some children's records that I had. There was one about a little boy who cried wolf, except instead of he was calling the fire department, like pretending that there was a fire at his house. And so the fire department comes first time, there's no fire, they're pissed off. He does it a second time because it's so fun to see the lights and the sirens. And the second time, they're like super pissed off. The third time, there is actually a fire. They don't come, and the whole house he's like watching the wallpaper like melt. He's watching his like teddy bear, and it's done with this like acoustic guitar. It's like this really eerie, folky kind of music. It's a frightening record. And there's no resolution. There's no like the fire department doesn't come in at the last second and like save the day. There's just like that's it.
I might have to find that one.
Yeah, it's pretty.
I remember when my dad would be off at work, he had a record player, and I'd kind of sneak into their bedroom, my parents, and in the corner was the record player with his headphones, and I must have been 4 or 5, and I just picked up this album that he had, and it was Journey Escape.
Oh, wow, okay.
And I put it on, and I was like, what is this? So for you, Mark, what was that? What is this moment?
Well, south side of Chicago is the baddest part of town. And if you go down there, you better just beware of a man named Leroy Brown. Now Leroy, morning trouble. You see, you stand about 6'4", although downtown
record store yet, things like that. So at some point, a friend of my mom's gave me, is it A Day at the Races or A Night at the Opera by Queen, the white album with Bohemian Rhapsody and other amazing hits. And I don't know if this woman like was thinking like, oh, what would a 7 or 8 year old boy like, or was she really into it, the person who gave it to me? But that was kind of the moment I was like, this is really cool, and there's a lot to be extracted from a lot of joy to be extracted from these 12-inch discs.
So let's keep walking down that path, if you don't mind. So kind of the molding, the seed is planted at that time. Then what happened in terms of genres of music?
Well, the band Kiss was massively popular in elementary school.
Yes, it was.
And I would say like every single person in the elementary school was a Kiss fan. Like it didn't matter, if you were from another country or you were a boy or a girl or whatever was going on. Everybody loved Kiss. So that was my next thing. Yeah. And then the top 40 radio continuing with that as well.
Casey Kasem, top 40?
I definitely listened to that. Yeah. But I guess I'm just talking about like the stations that play the same 40 songs over and over.
Yeah. I remember in the early 80s, that was the Bangles, Thompson Twins, Cyndi Lauper.
Wow. Okay.
Madonna. And maybe even before that, like Stray Cats.
Okay. Wow. You're very like, that's a very alternative, if you will.
Well, it's interesting. I started with Journey, and then somehow that Peace of Mind album by Iron Maiden entered my life. And I bought the tape only because of that cover.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother and I would listen to Iron Maiden nonstop. And then that somehow morphed into listening to Casey Kasem's radio show because we'd play video games while listening. And then after that, then in the Bay Area, this station called Live 105 popped up, and that changed my world because that's when post-punk alternative indie really came about.
Right.
Now, you had mentioned something about hardcore punk.
Sure. I mean, I guess I would start with, at some point I discovered Rolling Stone magazine. So I got that. There was a couple of things that got me into the thing. One was these like Lost Leader records that Warner Brothers put out. They were like double albums, and they only cost like $2 or something. Probably whatever it cost for them to press it. And there was one called Troublemakers, and it had Wire on it, and Republican Speculative Evo, the Urban Bird, the Washington DC on the way down, and a variety of others. And so that was pretty interesting. And then I remember they would always have the spotlight album review at the beginning of the record. So one week they had 2 records. It was Joy Division Closer and I think New Order Movement or something. They were like a joint review. And so I was like, what is this? The record covers look so bizarre compared to what everything else looked like. And so I hunted that stuff down.
Did you have friends that joined you in the hunt, or were you kind of flying solo there?
I mean, I don't have I didn't have any older siblings or anything, so I'm just completely flying solo. But then by the time, this is probably like 8th grade, I think.
Yeah.
And then by the time I got to high school, there are other people who are either of us of similar into a similar thing, or we'll tell each other about the bands we like and we'll become fans of each thing. Like I had a friend in high school who told me about King Crimson, and I was like, wow, that's amazing.
Did you get over to some punk shows, maybe some Black Flags, some Fugazi, that kind of stuff?
Definitely. I was really big. I was huge into Public Image Limited,
Yeah.
and they were on a major label, so you could buy all the stuff. And then they were playing a show, and Minor Threat was opening up, and that was like a local DC punk band. And before that, I don't think I knew that there was such a thing as local music. Like I knew that I thought everything was on like, CBS Records and Epic
Yeah.
and Warner Brothers. And I had no idea that there was like a whole nother level of bands that were actually in your neighborhood, and let alone were as young as Minor Threat were.
You are the first person that I've interviewed that have spoken quite highly about Public Image Limited. That doesn't mean other people haven't enjoyed their music. It just means this made an impression on you. So real quickly, what is it about PIL that you gravitated towards?
I mean, I think it was another like Rolling Stone record review. And I think there was an article about that. I think there's like a famous show that they're playing in New York, and they played behind like a film screen. They showed the film, they're playing behind it. People are like, I want to see the band. There was a riot or something. So I'm reading all these things, and then I go out and I find this record, which was called Second Edition, also known as Metal Box.
Yeah.
And it just sounded so completely different, because before that I'm listening to like Chic and, Barry Manilow, Kiss, Parliament,
Yeah.
Parliament. I mean, some of that stuff's kind of weird, and it's a cool combination of things, but PIL just sounded even though I wasn't even playing an instrument at the time, except for maybe violin at school,
Okay.
you could tell that like, okay, these people are not very good at their instruments, which was kind of like, you're like, this sounds really refreshing, because it's not like Journey where they're like, they know exactly, every single note is very precise.
God, I remember I went on a double date, 1989, here in San Francisco at the Warfield. PIL was touring for the 9 album, and Flesh for Lulu opened up. And I had not seen either of those bands at that time yet. And my dad dropped us off. We were like freshmen in high school. Oh my goodness. To see John Lydon do what he was doing with that incredible backing band.
Yeah, I bet.
And I know people kind of poo-poo that album because maybe it was a little too slick and a little too pop friendly, but God, I love that.
I love the first really slick record he did was the album.
Yeah.
Or a cassette or a compact disc, whatever title you want to use. And that's like one of my favorite albums of theirs, I think. Yeah.
Classic stuff. Okay, so now you're really getting into these different genres of music, going into shows, yeah?
Yeah, after the PIL Minor Threat show, I am going to, I don't know, 5 or 6 local punk shows a month. Bands like Government Issue, No Trend, Marginal Man, and then later like Rites of Spring.
Yep.
And things like that. And then also there was a great club called 930 Club, which was very small, but you would see like all the factory records. Like I saw Gerudy Column there. I saw Section 25 there.
Oh my God.
But then also like Red Hot Chili Peppers would play, or, pretty Butthole Surfers, or,
How did you afford going to shows? For me, it was working at Nordstrom's, and I would just save my paycheck and buy CDs and go to concerts.
I worked as a paper boy for like a delivery paper. It was actually an evening edition newspaper, which seems so way more antiquated than a regular newspaper even. It was the evening news. So when you got home from work, I guess, all the news that had happened that day that they could print that quickly, you could read it when you got home.
So you were a paper boy, like literally throwing and hucking at the doorstep?
Well, we kind of lived in it's kind of like a condo townhouse development. So yes, essentially I am doing that, but it's like the houses are not very far from each other. I'm just doing this on foot.
Yeah. And what about, did you enjoy school at all? Middle school or high school?
I definitely, I mean, I enjoyed, talking to people about music and like journalism class. I remember being like starting our own, like I started a fanzine like in 5th or 6th grade and sold them to my friends at school and things like that. And then our record label that was started at school. So yeah, so I definitely enjoyed school. Did I like, going to classes and trying to get good grades? Probably not.
It sounded like your mom was pretty supportive of you really branching out and discovering this world of music at that time, yeah?
I think so. I think she was also just kind of too busy to like pay much.
Yeah. So she wouldn't say to you, like my father always said, "You're going to another goddamn concert, William."
I don't know if she really, really minded, to be honest. Yeah. Like, so I guess she was supportive in that way.
I wonder if she felt like you already had your peeps, you had your community.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what it was. It was just hanging out with a bunch of friends.
Quickly tell us about Teen Beat. Anything you want to share?
The record label I started in high school, and we made tapes. Initially, we couldn't figure out how to dub from one tape to another because we only had like one tape deck, and there was no such thing as the 2 tape deck things. So I would bring the tape. We would bring the tape to school. It's just like an Unrest rehearsal or something. But we'd have a little cut. We'd make a cover. It would be like Team Beat logo was on it. And we weren't numbering. It was before we were numbering things, so everything was lettered. It was A, B, C, D, E. And we'd bring it to school, loan it to a friend. They would listen to it. I don't know if they got any enjoyment out of it. They would bring it back, and we'd loan it to the next person who was interested. And then eventually we did figure out how to make copies, and then we sold those at high school for like $1 a piece.
How fun.
Yeah, it was cool.
What a great outlet for you.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, for sure.
And
still doing it.
You're still doing it, and I'm sure you get emails or messages from people that were started or back in that time, the genesis of it. And go, I remember when.
Mm-hmm, totally.
Oh, that's gotta feel so good.
Definitely.
The responsibility at that time, did you have a sense of like what that truly was, or you're just kind of flying by the seat of your pants?
I think we're just making it up as we go, and it doesn't really, we're just doing what we think is going to be fun, that we can afford.
Yeah.
We're just making these tapes one at a time, home, like dubbing them by hand. Yeah. I don't know. Just making them as we go.
How has that process changed?
I'm still making those tapes one at a time. But we do occasionally, we'll hire a manufacturing facility to press records for us and print up T-shirts and things like that. Yes.
Wow, I think that's fantastic, and thank you for sharing. At this point of the conversation, we are going to spin the author's wheel. It's going to land on an author. I'm going to provide a quote, and feel free to share however you like in kind of your connection to your music, your label, anything that really pops up in mind. Okay, here we go. This first author, his name is Mark Manson. He wrote a New York Times best-selling book called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
My son loves that book.
A counterintuitive approach to living a good life. And have you read this, or just your son?
I have not read it.
There's a section here in a chapter, Failure is the Way Forward. Now, what I'm about to read to you is a little heavy, but I can't wait for your response. Here we go. In the 1950s, a Polish psychologist studied World War II survivors and how they coped with traumatic experiences in the war. This was Poland, so things had been pretty gruesome. These people had experienced or witnessed mass starvations, bombings that turned cities to rubble, the Holocaust, the torture of prisoners of war, and the rape and or murder of a family member, if not by the Nazis, then a few years later by the Soviets. As the psychologist Dabrowski studied the survivors, he noticed something both surprising and amazing. A sizable percentage of them believed that wartime experiences they suffered, although painful and indeed traumatic, had actually caused them to become better, more responsible, and yes, even happier people. Many described their lives before the war as if they'd been different people then, ungrateful, unappreciative of their loved ones, lazy, and consumed by petty problems, entitled to all they've been given. So what I'd like to know from you, Mark, has there been any real positive or construed as a negative experience that kind of woke you up and made you more appreciative about your life as a musician or just a person?
I guess I had a health scare where I had some sort of minor muscle behind my eye kind of gave out or something like that. So I had like double vision,
Wow.
like the Foreigner song. And it lasted for like a good, 6 to 8 weeks. And I remember going to the doctor because I was like, what on earth is going on? Because I could barely like walk down the street. I started wearing an eye patch, which is actually really cool, but it's difficult to wear. And they said, I think it's just this little microvascular something or other, and it's just going to get better by itself. Or you have a brain tumor in the back of your eye that's like pushing the eye to go the other way.
How old were you?
This is just like 2 or 3 years ago. So I had this like a brain scan or whatever, like you get in this like tube and you have to stay very, very still. And it's like, and I guess with a head one, it's like takes forever. So I'm like stuck in this thing for like an hour. Anyway, thankfully, it was just the little muscle thing and it went back to normal. But it did make me think like I should do more things that I want to do before going back to the briefly perfectly human book, do more things that I want to do before I can't do them anymore, perhaps.
When you had learned about this and going through the 6 to 8 weeks, I mean, it's a pretty simple question, but were you scared?
Yeah, definitely scared. I guess a lot of it was like, I had like one kid in college, one about to go to college, and I'm like, okay, I have to like sell all my records to get money for them to go to college, but also like, so people don't have to deal with this later.
Yeah.
Like, how do I start wrapping things up and how much time do I have to do that? So I guess it was a lot of practical stuff, which maybe took my mind off of the scary part.
Well, I'm very happy that the results ended up in a very positive favor for you.
Thank you. Me too.
Let us spin the wheel. Here we go.
All right.
Oh, are you familiar with the great film director, Brian DePalma?
I am. Yes.
Okay. You may be wondering, what the hell is William going to ask me regarding this guy? I got to plug my film professor at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo. He wrote a book called Brian DePalma's Split Screen, A Life in Film, a great analysis of this auteur's work. And here we go. Brian De Palma's entire directorial career would be marked by the conflict between independence and Hollywood, between the desire for autonomy and the compulsion to conform. Indeed, some of De Palma's films would become allegories of this conflict, as in Phantom of Paradise. The Phantom sells his soul to the devilish record producer, ironically an attempt to keep his own voice. Quote from De Palma, "The problem with being a revolutionary and a film director is that you get to feeling extremely schizoid." So Mark, tell the listeners and me, has there ever been a time in your music career that you have struggled between that thirst for autonomy and yet possibly conforming to what others have wanted from you? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
First, I should say we got to roll it back to the last question. And Phantom of the Paradise is one of my favorite movies. When I was going to sell my records
No
because
way.
I thought I was going to pass away,
Yeah.
I was going to have like a pop-up store or something, and it was going to be called Death Records, which is the name of the label in Phantom of the Paradise.
Oh my goodness.
But anyway, and I'm still going to do that. I think it's in some sort of form. But anyway,
Yeah.
I feel like my music has just been so weird and crazy and like all over the place. At least, well, probably a lot of it doesn't seem like that. But I feel like Unrest, Air Miami,
Yeah.
Fun Flan. I feel like we never did what people expected us to do, or we never went in the direction that people thought we were going to. And I don't think anyone ever really pushed me in any direction. I think we did, like when we were recording with 4AD,
Yep.
and we did the Air Miami record. Ivo, the guy who ran the label, did suggest the producer. But I think other than that, that was like the one album, which is I was very happy with. I think that was the only time anyone even tried to even nudge us anywhere.
Okay, so if people weren't nudging you, did you feel it at all inside of you thinking, you know what, maybe I could conform a little to this type of market to get a little extra moolah in my pocket?
I don't know if I ever thought that, but I mean, we did. I guess the Perfect Teeth album was like essentially a major label record in most of the world, other than like England. So I think there was like, oh, there's this opportunity to get this bigger audience or something. But I think even if I was trying to make music that was more broadly appealing, I'm just not that good at accomplishing that.
Hey, it doesn't sound like that's in your spirit, in your soul.
Right.
I admire that. That's why I like Brian DePalma as well, too. Although some would say there are some films he did sell out a little bit.
Which ones are those?
Perhaps the Snake Eyes, maybe.
Okay.
Maybe some would say because he got Tom Cruise for Mission Impossible, but I love that
he did
one.
that. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Great one.
Yeah.
Because you can see elements and themes splattered throughout these more popular ones still in his old work.
Right, right.
So it's not like he ever totally abandoned it. Okay, sounds like you and I need to have a DePalma podcast later. Here we go. Last one on the wheel. All right. The last author's quote comes from a gentleman by the name of Rick Rubin. He wrote a book called The Creative Act, A Way of Being. Came out last year. And this is a chapter called Setting. We are affected by our surroundings, and finding the best environment to create a clear channel is personal and to be tested. It also depends on your intention. Isolated places like a forest, a monastery, or a sailboat in the middle of the ocean are fine locations to receive direct transmissions from the universe. If instead you want to tune into the collective consciousness, you might sit in a busy spot with people coming and going and experience source as filtered through humanity. The secondhand approach is no less valid. So one step further removed might be to plug into culture itself, constantly consuming art, entertainment, news, and social media, all the while noticing the patterns the universe is promoting. How would you like to respond to what Rick just said with regards to inspiration for your music?
Mm-hmm. I always felt like I watched a massive amount of television when I was a kid, and I heard, thousands of commercial jingles and amongst all the pop hits I heard. And I think that's somehow like in my subconscious creative brain, all that stuff. But I also am very solitary, I think, when I write my music. And I don't think I've attempted to make a song that sounded like someone else's song in 40 years or so. So I think I would, if I had to choose out of those, I would say the solitary sailboat in the forest thing would be the one I would choose.
Television such as what? Do you remember?
Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, Mork and Mindy, Fantasy
Wow.
Island, Love Boat, Mary
Love
Tyler Moore,
Mork and
Square
Mindy.
Pegs.
Yes, people forget about that classic.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good one. You know what? No one's ever told me that before. That's really cool. Because TV, I mean, we know provides great comfort for people and a great source of inspiration.
I mean, that's where I saw Phantom of the Paradise, was on TV.
Oh my God, what did you think of that the first time?
It was crazy. I was
Yeah.
like, what on earth is this? It was like one of those Saturday afternoon, like they just throw on these random movies.
That was like how I experienced Dress to Kill.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, what the hell? Oh, what is this? Now, listeners, when I say, oh, you got to watch it and you'll know what I'm talking about. As a young boy, we'll put it that way. Okay. So, Mark, there's a record store in San Francisco. It's no longer there. Boo-hoo. It's on Market Street, or was. And it was called Streetlight Records. And I went in there and I saw this Perfect Teeth on CD and took it home. I think I probably played it 8 times that day.
Wow.
Oh my goodness. The jingle and the jangle, you hooked me immediately.
Wow. That's good to hear.
It was great to hear from my ears. And I was so enamored of what I was hearing because it had this feel of the jingle jangle that I'd come to love and know, The Wedding Present. One of my favorite bands out of Leeds, England. And then fast forward to college, when I took Perfect Teeth along with me, God, I'm sharing a little too much. I would get up in my room, I'd have a few to drink, I'd take my tennis racket, and that was my guitar.
Nice.
And I thought it was you. I'd do that with Luna. I'd do that with The Wedding Present, James. And I would look at the strings on the tennis racket. They started wearing down. And then, of course, their songs we're actually going to talk about on this album. But we've arrived to an anniversary for Perfect Teeth. 32 years later, Here we go. Let's talk about it. Retrace those steps for this portion, and then we're going to talk about the actual anniversary. Yeah.
Well, I think we had done the previous record in the summer of 1991. I think, and part of that record was done the year before that. But anyway, that was summer of 91. I think we wanted it to come out in the fall, and for some reason it didn't come out till like March. And then we were just doing all these singles. Yep. So we did a single for like Sub Pop. We did a single for K Records, Homestead Records. Everybody wanted us to do a single. And then I think we had done a session in March, 1 year before we did Perfect Teeth. We went in and we recorded what would become Calf Carol and the song Angel, I'll Walk You Home, which is kind of like a very slowed down Calf Carol. And so we had been, I think we played those songs for the next year. I think 6 Layer Cake was another one that we had in the can. And then at some point we're like, well, we should record another record because it's already been a year and a half. Like, what are we doing with ourselves here? We're a band, but we're not recording. We're recording all these singles, but like, how about an album? So I think we just had those like 3 songs, and then everything else is just like written like very quickly. And we booked time with this guy, Brian Paulson, contacted him. He had done the Slint album, the second Slint album. I think Steve Albini did the first one. And he had also done a record on Teen Beat by a band called Gaster del Sol. that I like the sound of. And he seemed like a very super nice guy on the phone. And he said, we should record at this place in the middle of the woods in Minnesota. And I think the wedding present had recorded Sea Monsters there, which I can't remember if we knew that at the time. And then when we got there, Nirvana had just left and they recorded in utero. So we I think we drove there because we wanted all our amplifiers and our guitars. Our booking agent lived in Minneapolis. So I think we stayed with her the first night, and then we went grocery shopping, and then we drove to the, I don't know, half an hour outside of Minneapolis, middle of the woods, middle of nowhere. The studio is there's a house where all the bands stay.
Yeah.
There's an indoor heated pool. There is a separate building for the studio. You can look out with there's glass floor to ceiling. You can look out in the woods. Speaking of the Rick Rubin quote of being in the middle of the woods.
There you go.
And we met Brian, and thankfully, sometimes because you're talking to these people on the phone, but once you get in the studio, is it going to work?
Right.
Thankfully we got along with him. I remember the first day, as this is kind of often the experience in studios, there's always just one small glitch, something's not working, or some patch cable is in the wrong spot and nothing works because of that. So I think the first day it was just sitting around. And finally, I think we started recording at 6:00 at night. And Calf Carol was the first song.
Oh, okay.
That we recorded. And we had so much pent up energy that we played it twice as fast as we normally did. And that's on the record. I think that's the first take, and it's super fast.
Yep.
At least it sounded fast to us then. Now it just sounds normal, I suppose. And then we just had a great time. There was an assistant engineer who was there, and I was actually just looking at the video that we shot there during the recording.
Okay, so then what was the connection to 4AD?
Well, we had done the previous record, came out in March 92. And right when that came out, people seemed to like that record.
Mm-hmm.
And there was 2 or 3 companies from England that were calling us, wanting to release it. And we spoke to all of them, and we decided that 4AD was going to be the one to release that record. And they released it on this new kind of side label that they had called Guernica. And so I think that came out really quickly, because the album in the US came out in March. I think we talked to 4AD in April. Album came out in June. They flew us over there. We're playing shows in England. So we were already with 4AD at the time. Sorry, go ahead.
Tell the listeners, what were you feeling? Was it overwhelming? Was it pure exuberance?
That we had a company that put our records out in England, or that we
and that you have 4AD, you've got Ivo, you're playing in England, you're gaining all this attention and traction, momentum.
Right. It was cool. I mean, we were already kind of the attention was coming at us. Yeah. And then we kind of chose we were 4AD, we know them because they did Lush or whatever, Modern English.
Cocteau Twins.
And then we had to go through went through the whole process again, because I think for that record, they were just licensing it for England. And so when we did the next album, it was kind of this whole process of who do we do this record with? And so a lot of that was, do we do it with Atlantic Records or Elektra Records? And then, or do we stick with these people that we know in England who seem to be very nice? So we chose 4AD again after the initial experience. But no, yeah, it was great. It was a lot of fun. And we played a festival. I can't remember. Was that 92 or 93? It was the All Virgos Are Met. No, that's not it. What was it called? 13 Year Itch.
Oh, yeah.
At the London ICA. I don't know if you were in England at the time.
I was there in 94.
Okay.
So with Perfect Teeth, you get signed to 4AD for this album. You're doing some touring. Tell the listeners who's part of the band at that time.
Mm-hmm. Well, Phil and I we're in high school together. And so we've been playing together since like 9th grade in high school the whole time. And then when we all went to college, Tim couldn't really be in the band because he was in Michigan. So we got one of Phil's college friends to be the bass player, Dave Park. And then he got married and moved away too. And then I had met someone. I did a radio show at the University of Maryland, and we would take on-air phone calls. And we had two of the people that would call up were both named Bridget. And I met one of these Bridgets, and I just assumed she was like a college student, but it turns out she was in high school. But anyway, so I met her in, I think, 1988. And at some point, like in 1990, we needed a bass player, and she had already been in a band called Velocity Girl as a singer and bass player.
Yeah.
And had either left or she left that band, and then she was not in a band. So I was like, oh, well, we need a bass player, and you would probably be great. So that was the band. It was just the three of us.
Sure was. When Perfect Teeth was assembled in terms of the sequencing of songs, was that really important for the band? Or was it just kind of, we'll just throw them in the air and see where they land? And were you guys pretty serious about the order?
I was definitely pretty serious. I think I kind of would always take over the process for the most part. Like, I feel like Unrest was always kind of my band, and I wrote the vast majority of songs and I sang the vast majority of them. So I kind of would usually sequence the records, and people would generally go with what I decided. And for each record, I think going back to the very first records, we would record like about 20 songs for each record.
Oh.
So the making of the record really was about the sequencing and like which songs, not just what order they're going to be in, but which songs are going to be on the record.
Yes.
Like the one before that, Imperial, could have been a completely different record. But with that one, I think we decided there's always been a humorous element to Unrest.
Yep.
And with that one, we decided there's not going to be any of these funny party har songs on there. So all those ended up on the singles. And then with Perfect Teeth, I was actually just thinking about this a lot when we were doing the reissue, is that if I had to sequence it over again today, I would probably do it completely differently.
You would.
Yeah.
Tell us if you don't mind. I mean, we don't have to do track by track, but there are some big ones.
Yeah. I mean, I think I would get rid of some song. Like, I think Makeout Club, it would be off the record.
Oh,
Breather, a lot of the songs on side 2, 6 Layer Cake, I would get rid of that. I would have put Vibe Out. I don't know if you're familiar with that one. That was like an outtake because we recorded so many songs, but all the extras ended up on singles. So I would have put Vibe Out on there. I really liked Where Are All Those Puerto Rican Boys. I probably would not have put Angel, I'll Walk You Home as the first song.
Okay.
Maybe not even on the record. I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like it's kind of like the singing is not the best.
Okay.
But it's not that I'm not happy with the record. It's just like, I would revisit it a little bit.
And that's, most people would do that, right? Okay. Now, I believe, and I don't have the ticket stub to prove it because I kept a lot of my ticket stubs. You guys came to San Francisco, and I believe you came to Slim's, this really small club. Might have been Great American Music Hall. It was one of those.
Okay.
And it was to promote this album. And I remember that crowd was so amped up for you guys. But did you enjoy performing live?
I really enjoyed playing live, yeah. I mean, it was great, especially being on tour. I think you got so tight with the other band members, and you got so rehearsed that you could kind of like, your body could almost just play the song on autopilot. But then since you knew it so well, you could kind of improvise a little bit within the structure of the song. And we would always improv a lot. Like, I'd say half the Unrest songs were always kind of improv live, and the other half were very, do this twice, do this 3 times.
Was there a particular song from Perfect Teeth that the crowd kind of went a little bit nuttier? Or maybe, was it Light Command or, I don't know, Breather?
I would say, I think didn't play Breather very many times. I would probably say Calf Carol was the one. It's also hard because that was the last album. So we did tour after that, but I think people would probably go crazier for like Suki or Cherry Cream On from the previous album because they had known it. They knew the album better.
Yeah.
Like when we did like a reunion shows, then you could kind of tell like, oh, people really like West Coast Love Affair or whatever. Like that's the hit, or
The person that you also got involved with is a gentleman by the name of Chris Big.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell listeners who this Chris guy is?
Yeah. So there was the 4AD office there was an upstairs and a downstairs. So the upstairs and it had a little balcony. And if you looked over the balcony, there was a design studio, I guess, in the basement. And then on the upstairs, it was, I don't know, maybe like 8 people who were like, the promotions people and the, I don't know, manufacturing liaison or whatever was going on up there. And then downstairs, it was the design agency. So it was Vaughn Oliver and Chris Big. And they had no computers. This was, I guess when I was there, it was like 90, 92, 93, 94, 95. I think at the very last time I went there, like 95, they actually had bought a computer and they had a new employee there to work the computer because Vaughn and Chris didn't know how to do that. So when the new band would come onto the label, this is different for the Imperial record because that was on the Guernica label. So Guernica actually had a completely separate design firm. An outside firm designed all the Guernica covers.
Got it.
But for 4AD, you were kind of like assigned, or maybe Vaughn and Chris probably figured this out, who was going to take over, because they wouldn't just do your one cover. They would do all the singles. They would do the next album, the album after. Like His Name Is Live, I believe, is Vaughn Oliver. The Breeders, that's Vaughn Oliver. The Pixies, Vaughn Oliver. Chris Big did like Wolfgang Press and a lot of other things. So Chris was our designer. But I was also a designer. I had designed all of the Unrest covers before that. So I was kind of like, this is kind of my thing.
Yeah, sure. Right.
But then I'm also like, these guys are really good. So somehow we kind of, we got along well. I got along really well with Chris.
Yeah.
And so he helped me kind of like collaborate with him. So I would design the type. So I did like the type on the cover of Perfect Teeth, the Unrest with the the stripes logo, which was kind of just evocative of like European soccer jerseys or something to me. And then I gave him, I was like, how about I'll give him just photos. I was like, could be inspiration or you could use it on the cover. And so we would just kind of collaborate like that. Like, I don't think I've never disliked anything he did. So I never like rejected anything, but he was a good sport to take all my concerns and my input for sure.
And maybe that harkens back to the DePalma thing, the independence, working with somewhat of the bigger guy, even though 4AD was known for independence.
Right. Maybe a little bit. Yeah. I mean, they were definitely obviously way bigger than Teen Beat was, but they also seemed tiny compared to the other places we had been, like at Elektra and Atlantic and things like that. And it seemed like they kind of cared. Well, I guess when you have that many, like a small amount of people, it's they care more about it versus like that's just their job.
Do you mind if we listen to a couple tracks?
Let's do it.
Okay. The first one I picked from the Perfect Teeth is track number 4. Let's take a quick listen to this song called Light Command.
Back when I was 20.
Alrighty. So I had to say, Mark, I've heard the song so many times, and I'm sure many Unrest fans as well. You know, people talk about the first track, people talk about the number 3 track, like in baseball, the number 3 hitter, and then you have the fourth hitter come in, can do some real damage, get those people around the bases. And I feel like with music and albums, the number 4 track kind of doesn't get the proper love. But I think this is a great number 4 track. So any memories and any analysis with Light Command? Was it easy to put together, to compose, arrange?
It was always, I mean, to be honest, it was always a little bit difficult for me to come up with parts for Bridget's songs.
Okay. Yeah.
Like I think the first song that she wrote for Unrest was on the Imperial album called June.
Uh-huh.
And for the first half of the song, it's just bass and drums because I couldn't figure anything out. And I was also like, it sounds great the way it is.
Yeah.
And maybe with Light Command, maybe I just went a little too far. I was like making it a little, maybe there's too much of me in there, but not to rethink all these things. But I think, yeah, well, Bridget would come to, either one of us would come into the practice with a song and everybody else would just kind of make up their own parts. And then I think we came up with there's a very long coda for Light Command. Right. And I think we had kind of experimented with that on the previous record with these kind of like instrumental codas. And they just kind of seemed like pretty fun. And we always, as I said, we like to improvise. So it was kind of a perfect improvisational opportunity.
It was, and it transitioned into Food and Drink Synthesizer, which I actually used to put back in the day, Mark. I used to put that track onto my answering machine as background. And I would say something really silly about, I can't pick up the phone right now because I'm being launched off into space, because that's what it sounded like to me. My friends thought I was so nutty. But
we actually had that. That was the Food and Drink Synthesizer is something from the Starship Enterprise and Star Trek. It was the thing they would push some buttons and like your meal would come out. And so I guess we had, for some reason, I had the Star Trek sound effects CD with us in the studio, and that we just took the title of that for some reason.
Let's go to track number 7.
I should also say that Ivo, the 4AD guy, wanted Light Command. He was like, I think Light Command should be the first single from the record.
Really?
But then I think I was like, are you kidding? Makeout Club is the hit.
Well, that's what we're going to listen to, Makeout Club. Let's take a listen to track number 7, again from the Perfect Teeth album, Makeout Club. And I challenge you whilst listening to this not to airstrum.
The first one.
Okay, Mark. Well, I told you my little embarrassing story about air guitaring in my apartment during college and Makeout Club. A lot of this album, I did that too. You made a video for this, and it hit one of my favorite shows. MTV 120 Minutes. So now you mentioned that you would have taken this song off the album, but in memory, share something that you go, man, yeah, this song does kick ass. What is it about this thing?
Yeah, I don't know what I was trying to do. I was kind of deliberately trying to create a pop song.
Well, you
And
did it.
Sorry?
You did it beautifully.
And I think I was, for some reason, thinking, I don't know if I thought this before or after I had written it, but I was like, has like a Jackson 5 kind of vibe to it.
Okay.
I don't know if I was going into it that way or if I just was listening later and thought that. I think it's too long. It has like 4 verses or something.
Yeah.
But I think it's good. That was actually one of the ones that Guy Fixon, who produced the next album, which was Air Miami.
Yeah.
He was brought in to like remix it for radio. Because I think we were still so controlling in the studio that the vocals were so low on a lot of the songs.
Who inspired you to play guitar?
You mean like like I guess it was probably Paul Stanley and Ace Frehley and Gene Simmons. I probably didn't even know what a bass guitar was. They just, just that rock music of the 70s.
Yeah.
And then probably seeing all those DC punk shows, the hardcore shows.
Sure. Absolutely. Okay, so now we have a reissue, yeah?
Yes.
And that's coming out when? Could you tell the listeners?
March 28th.
And what goodies can they expect?
There is not just the Perfect Teeth album, but there's another album. Like I said, we always recorded so many other songs during the same session. So the album is called Extra Teeth, which Chris Big came up with the title.
Nice.
And so they'll be bundled together. I think Extra Teeth has almost all of the songs. So together, I think there's only just one song missing, and it is the 33-minute song called Hydro, which we just could not fit on vinyl.
Sure.
And then Chris also wanted to include the Isabel 12-inch that we had done before that with him, so we could kind of include all the Unrest stuff that he had designed.
Awesome.
All of the Unrest 480 stuff. And then there's also a booklet that he'd made, a catalog is what he calls it. It's a 16-page thing with like liner notes by all 3 of us and Chris Big and Ivo. And there's a discography in there. There's like all the artwork is in there. It looks great.
Okay. So
and then there's color vinyl options if you're into that kind of thing.
I'm sure people listening are thinking, will there be any touring at all for this? In any shape or form?
There is nothing planned, but I am doing solo shows where I play quite a bit of this record. So I'm doing like Angel, I Walk You Home, Kath Carroll, So Sick. Not doing Like Command because that's like Bridget's song.
Yeah.
Soon It's Going to Rain, Makeout Club, Capizio, which is on the second disc, Plastic Film, which is also on the second disc.
And when is this tour?
It's not really a tour. I'm just kind of doing different shows. I'm actually doing a private show in New York on Saturday. And then I'm going to be playing with Tsunami in DC on March 27th, the eve of the album release. Fantastic. And I'll also be doing Boston and maybe LA.
Let me know if you get up to San Francisco.
Oh, I will.
All right, everyone. Whether you grab the older edition, the reissue, Perfect Teeth, it really, as I've said often to artists, when they create pop music that is so bloody infectious, I call it PPP, pure pop perfection. And this album has it all, including Star Trek. It's a great, great album that I feel sometimes it kind of gets lost in that 4AD shuffle, but it's a gem, and I highly recommend it. So congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's cool.
And I have to ask one more question before we close the curtains. Most bands, artists put out an anniversary album on a zero, like 10th anniversary, 20th. You did not.
Well, this is technically, it is called the 30th anniversary edition. We've been working on this thing for like 3 or 4 years. And if it was just solely on Teen Beat, it's a 4AD Teen Beat co-release. If it was just on Teen Beat, it would be called the 32nd annual anniversary, but it's the 30th. It's a delayed 30th.
And then again, real quickly, if you wouldn't mind telling the audience what's coming down the line for you in 2025 and beyond.
I've been recording with a friend of mine, Trevor Campman, who records under the name Holland. And we have this album under the name Uncomfortable Police that'll be out in May. And my film, I have a documentary that I made about a guy named Butch Willis. And that was just released on Blu-ray disc by a company called Factory 25, which is like a cool indie filmmaker company. So I think that's mostly it. And then I'm going to be recording like another solo album probably.
How the hell you look so young? Because you are one busy man. How do you keep it all together?
No idea.
That's amazing.
I have like ideas all the time, and then I'm like,
yeah,
that's going to take a lot of time too.
Your creative output is extraordinary.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to leave us with one more quote, but this time neither of us are going to say anything.
Doesn't matter where you're looking. It doesn't matter who you're painting. Taking time.
And we're going to end with Uncle Rick here. Not my uncle, but Rick Rubin, of course. And again, this comes from the book, The Creative Act, A Way of Being. And this is what he says. Feel free to experiment. The goal is to commit to a structure that can take on a life of its own, instead of creating only when the mood strikes, or to start each day with the question of how and when are you going to work on your art. Put the decision-making into the work, not into when to work. The more you reduce your daily life maintenance tasks, the greater the bandwidth available for creative decisions. Albert Einstein wore the same thing daily, a gray suit. Limit your practical choices to free your creative imagination. Mark Robinson of Unrest, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. Congratulations on the reissue of Perfect Teeth. Look forward to upcoming work from you in the future. You're a real gentleman, and it's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. Same to you.
You're quite welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And remember, great music is all around us. You just have to keep your ears open. Ciao.
But your body kept on swimming, all alone from life's beginning. Admiration is still swelling, Isabel.